said that there's two there's two heterim for learning Kabbalah, right? One is to save a life. One is to usher in the days of Mashiach before they come, right? So too, there's also two ways of learning Kabbalah in fitting with those two things, much like the Mishnah and the Gemara in the Nigla of Torah, right? In the revealed parts of Torah, you can learn it in like pill form or expanded like food form, as we said yesterday. So these two ways of learning Kabbalah correspond to two reasons you're allowed to learn Kabbalah, as we'll soon see. But before we go into that, as we said, the Rebbe jumped into this brackets where he said he wants to solve a contradiction in the Alter Rebbe himself. Here, take one of these. Take one of these. If you remember, we said yesterday at the end of the class, the Alter Rebbe in Hilchos Talmud Torah, in the laws of Torah learning, which are fascinating and definitely should be learned by all, he says that Kabbalah is in which parts? Which I left out a part, right? There's this rule that a person is supposed to divide their learning into thirds, right? What were the three parts? Mikra, Mishnah, Gemara, or Talmud, right? So a person, either their life or their day, let's say we're supposed to divide it into three parts of the day. So in the laws of Talmud Torah, the Alter Rebbe says the Kabbalah is in which part?
The Kabbalah is in the Talmud.
The Talmud, exactly. And then in Likutei Torah, which is, by the way, like a Talmudic way of learning Chassidus, mind you, he says over there that it should be in which part? Mikra, right? So he's in a state of contradicting himself, seemingly, but based on what we said before in the Sikha, the Rebbe says we can get it out of hot water in a big way, right? So we're going to take it from inside. Right, so take it from page 173, and the very top of the leftmost column, right? We were saying that why did he put? What's the justification for putting the Kabbalah into the place called Mikra, right? What does that have to do with the written Torah? Mikra means the Tanakh. Why are we going to throw Kabbalah all of a sudden into the Tanakh? Do you remember what we said about that?
I think it's because it explains like the hidden secrets, the panimis of the Torah. So like it follows in the same line as like the Torah. The Torah is there the Torah is already the blueprint, and we're just like learning more about the Torah.
Okay, I mean, on one level, he said it's because the Zohar is organized in accordance with the parshas. So in other words, it just matches because in other words, it's parsha-like in terms of its topics. But no, he actually did not say it's because the Zohar explains that. He said the opposite. He says just like the Mikra, the words of God, are basically impossible to ever really understand because they're referring there's infinite levels of like divine mystery contracted into like mere letters, and no matter how deep and no matter how much understanding you're going to get from it, you're never really going to understand it. He says the same thing is true of Kabbalah, right? Because it's talking about a topic which is ungraspable, right? It's not something that you can know the mahus of, only the metzias of. What is the difference? The mahus means you can know the thing itself. The metzias means you can only know that there is such a thing. So, for example, like the angels, they know the mahus of spirituality, but physicality, they don't know what it is. They just know that it is. And we, the opposite, we know physicality, we know the mahus, the essence of what it is. We can we know it, but spirituality, no one's ever seen anything. No one's ever seen an angel, so we only know that it is, right? So there's this concept of like, if you can't really know something, you just know about it, you're never really knowing it at all. So just like the Chumash, which we don't really ever know what it is, so to Kabbalah, it's talking about a topic which is completely beyond us, and therefore, according to that reason, he puts it, at least in Likutei Torah, in the category called Mikra, for that reason. Now, the last paragraph, and we'll turn the page here. Just checking some footnotes here. Okay, so fine. Al pi anal, according to all we said, shnei ofani b'lim pnimis Torah. We've already solved this because we said there's two different manners in which you can learn the secrets of the Torah, right? Yesh l'taveh. Therefore, we can sort it out. Shim lomed rak nekudos ha'inyanim. If you're only learning like the points of the matter, in other words, you're learning Kabbalah in a Mishnah-like way, al derech devarim ketzarim sheba Mishnah, just like, for example, the shorthand, so to speak, of the Mishnah, in which case, like we said before, everything's packed into a Mishnah, but it's just in a few letters. If you're going to learn Kabbalah in that manner, right, then how is that bichlal mikra? So it is part of the mikra, the Tanakh section of your day. It doesn't have to do with the Kabbalah stam. It has to do with how, in what manner you're learning Kabbalah. So Alter Rebbe is not at all contradicting himself. He's teaching you something. That there's two different ways of learning Kabbalah. And if you're learning Kabbalah like short, right, pithy statements of the secrets of the Torah, which you'll find a lot of areas where that's easy to do. For example, the whole Zohar, the whole Kislev Arizal, in a certain sense, without their explanations, they're all like that, right? In other words, it doesn't like, if you learn a Zohar, let's say you could theoretically understand some of its depth. Certainly you couldn't understand it by like a casual reading, just like the Mishnah. Let's say you could learn 7 pages of Gemara about the Mishnah. You could, but when you learn the Mishnah alone, you're definitely not learning all of its depth, right? It's not like the style you're working on. So too, depending on how you're going to access the Kabbalah, right? Then it could be in the area called Tanakh and Mikra or not. When you start diving into it and delving into all its details with mafarshim, with a deeper explanation, and he says particularly, particularly when you actually grasp the matter fully and you become one with the concept. You're not just taking a pill where the doctor says, here, just take 2 of these, believe me, you'll be better. You have to have belief. You don't really know what it is. Maybe it has an effect on you, right? It strengthens your belief, but you don't know anything about it. So, but when you learn it properly and you become one with it and you digest it, it's a whole different style of learning. And therefore, when you learn like that, you're supposed to count that for your third in Talmud learning, because you're learning in the manner of Talmud. Shulimud tameh halachas, turning the page, because this is the learning of the reasons behind the halachas. Ad limud be'iyun, to the point that you're learning deeply into it. Lavin davar mitoch davar, to understand. Davar mitoch davar is sort of a shorthand for bina, right? When you want to lavin something, to understand something, it says you just learn one thing from another, right? So in other words, the idea is that you're breaking it down until you can sort of come up with even with like chidushim on the matter. You understand it so well, you can expand it yourself. So therefore, end of bracket. The Alter Rebbe is now totally makes a perfect sense. Depending on how you're learning it, it would be put into a different part of your day. You got it?
Yeah. Is that why Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai spent most of his time on Nigla? Because he was transferring the Nigla to Kabbalah.
He was transferring.
He was achieving the insights to Kabbalah on Nigla.
Right. In other words, I think what you're saying is like when he was learning Nigla, he was learning Kabbalah in a Nigla type fashion, because there is no such thing as like the topic of Kabbalah being like a separate topic than the Nigla. Every single page of Gemara, if you knew how to read it correctly, is like a Kabbalistic masterpiece, right? Because it's not something else. It's just Kabbalah just shows you that there's another level, but you can access those levels through the. So yeah, I would say like maybe when he wrote the actual Zohar, which only took him a few months, he sort of wrote the Mishnah, right? And the whole rest of the time, he was, so to speak, learning the Gemara on that Mishnah by actually learning Gemara, right? Which is how we should be also. All right, so going on. Yesh lomar sheshnei ofanim elu. These 2 manners of learning Kabbalah, which is, right, the manner of the learning, tuluim bebeis ta'amim. They depend on the 2 different reasons why you're allowed to, right? So in other words, you're in Galus, you're not allowed to learn Kabbalah. That's like the backdrop. But if you're already going to find a heter that you're allowed to, then tell me what the reason is you're allowed to, and then I'll tell you the manner in which you can learn based on which reason you're learning for. You understand that? You get that? So he says, these 2 manners depend on the 2 different reasons of why there's a Gilu of Pnimis Torah in the later generations. So he says, clarifying it. Al piatam mishum eis lasos laHashem. If you want to say that I'm learning Kabbalah right now because it's a time to do for Hashem, I have to destroy your Torah. In other words, I'm breaking the laws of the Torah to save the lives of the Jewish people. Pikuach nefesh. spiritually, right? Because there's such an overpowering darkness and the generations are in a state of such descent and decline. Therefore, Therefore, it's sufficient if you will learn Kabbalah in a way of points, right, and small snippets. Because even a drop of Pnimiyas Torah, which is called the Hamaor Sheba, the luminance inside of it. Is that a word? Illumination inside of it. It's such powerful Torah that it has the power to save your life. So if you just come across like a nice Hasidic vort, right, or you read some of the parts of Kabbalah in a shorthand that you don't fully understand, it will still save your life. Because as we said before, if you want to practically, how does that work? We said before, like you might pick up the Kislev Arizal, read through it, and have no idea what it's saying. I almost guarantee that will happen to you if you just pick it up and read it like that by yourself. However, you will realize very quickly that there's some genius, like mysterious wisdom going on over here that is in existence. It's talking about like it's almost like the same if you would pick up a calculus book, right? And you don't know math. Right, you might not understand a word it says, but you'd be like, whoever wrote there's genius going on over here. There's systems and there's things that are way beyond me. So even though I don't understand it, it still will like shock you into the realization that there's a God, right? So the idea is that if you're learning Kabbalah because you need to save your life, right, and in other words, to like remind you that there's a God and to strengthen your faith in these dark times, a drop is enough. Because that's enough. The luminary quality of it is enough to sort of like bring you back to your full strength of faith, right? But here's the point: This line is basically says it all. Because a drop is sufficient to save your life, then guess what? You're not allowed to learn one drop more. Why? Because we're dealing with a situation where Kabbalah is usher. We're looking for a heter. Can I learn, Rabbi? So I said, he said, well, what seems to be your problem? Well, I'm going to die. Well, then yes, you can learn a little bit. If you learn a little bit, it will save your life. Can I learn a little bit more? What would be your reason? I'm not going to die. No, Kabbalah is usher, right? You cannot learn Kabbalah unless it's to save your life. So if a drop is enough, then a drop is all you get. Because you're dealing with mama's precious goods that are not allowed to be taught until Mashiach comes. Not so when it comes to learning Pnimiyas Torah for the sake of the second reason, which was what? To prepare the Jewish people for the days of Mashiach in an Eliyahu Navi type of fashion, where we have to straighten our hearts and get ready for the coming revelation, right? In other words, for the Gila of Pnimiyas Torah that will be in that time. So what is this? Now you're saying, Rabbi, can I learn Chassidus to prepare myself for the day when the entire world will be occupied in learning Hasidus, right? I know we're not there yet, but it's coming soon. My life is already preserved, but I want to learn Hasidus in order to prepare myself for these great days. I got to get ready for the wedding. Since in those days, there will be an absolute deep understanding and full understanding of the knowledge of God. It says as much as humanly possible, to the point that Maim Liyam Mechasim, to the point that like water fills the sea, the knowledge of God will fill the earth. Then it's understood. Therefore, then the preparation for those times has to be fitting and similar to the way that Kabbalah will be revealed in those times. Meaning to say, you got to learn a lot. You got to learn it in a way that you'll understand it. You're not dealing with Kabbalah anymore to save your life. You're dealing with Kabbalah because you want to sort of like bring yourself into the reality of the future messianic times, in which case, definitely not learn a drop. You have to learn it in deep, like saturated understanding style.
Like Talmud.
Like Talmud. Dalit. Al pi kol anal, according to everything we said, Yisbar Heitiv, Hasipar anal, Oros hakitrug al zeh. So now we're going back to our tale. If you remember, we started this whole thing off with two conflicting stories of Hasidic masters, right? One, the Alter Rebbe saved the life of the Maggid of Mezrich, who was spreading too much Hasidus, right? And he brought the muscle of the grinding up the crown jewel in order to save the life of the prince, and therefore Hasidus was saved. And then the very next generation, the Alter Rebbe himself was put in prison for spreading too much Hasidus, and yet he was unsure whether he should continue, to the point that he thought maybe he shouldn't, and only until his rabbis told him, once you've begun, you should continue, then he went on. We said, why was there another accusation on the same concept, like double jeopardy? So he says, now we can understand very well the story that we said, regarding the accusation that the Alter Rebbe was saying too much Hasidus, right? That he was quickly swept up again and stopped, even though he broke that very accusation the previous generation. You with me? We sure? Okay. Chirish ba'ofen giloi Hasidus al yidei Rabbeinu Hazaken legabe Abal Shem Tov v'Magid v'Talmideihem. Now, he says the novelty of the revelation of Hasidus of the Alter Rebbe over that of the Baal Shem Tov, the Magid, and all their students, right? So any big and famous and wondrous rabbi who is not the Alter Rebbe and the later generations of Chabad, which we love them very much, I'm including the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid, so there's no competition over here. We love all the rabbis. But any of them, besides the Alter Rebbe and his school of thought, there was a huge difference in in what they were bringing to the table, into the novel approach that they brought to Hasidus, right? Yesh liros b'pashtus. We can see very obviously and simply, kishalomdim Torah's Hasidus shenizgal salanu, right? That when we learn matters of Hasidus that were revealed to us, shenyani Hasidus shenizgal al yedei Baal Shem Tov, that those things which were revealed through the Baal Shem Tov, bring all the books of the Baal Shem Tov, please, to the table, right? We already have one on the table, I see, and I tried this yesterday, I couldn't find it. There's another one, right? And then you will see that those are the two, right? And he didn't even write them, right? There were collections of his students of two thin books, right? You're talking about the master himself, the king and the father of all Hasidus. This is one of his books, and there's one more of similar size. Right, so he said you can see with your own eyes when it comes to the revelation of Hasidus, right? That it was in a way of nekudos, right? And you want to bring the Magid, another one, another book, maybe two, right? Now you say, well, what about all the Hasidic masters that were like the students of the Magid? If you pile up all their books together, you're going to fill exactly one bookshelf, one big bookshelf, maybe two maximum. Yeah, how many books did? I don't even want to get into it. The masters of all the students, right? The Magid had, I forget, 80 students, I think, and they were all like mamish Hasidic masters, each one with an entire Hasidic group, right? But the Sfarim that they wrote and the Hasidus that they revealed, they were revealing it in a way of medicine. And therefore they dropped little bombs on you, which could mamish save your life. I'm not knocking it. It's the Baal Shem Tov you're talking about. When he brought this Torah into the world, the entire Jewish people had a resurrection from the dead, right? To the point that they say his name was Yisrael, which is the name of the Jewish people. Why was he called Yisrael? Because when a person faints and you whisper his name into his ear, it wakes him up. So like Yisrael Baal Shem Tov was literally like the God whispering our name into our ear to literally wake us up out of a faint. The Jewish people were on the verge of collapse. And if it wasn't for the medicine of the Baal Shem Tov, we wouldn't have made it. But nonetheless, there's no denying that all their Torah is in a drop-like form. Bekitzer, right? Al derech lashon Mishnah shidavar katzar. And this is just like the Mishnah, which is basically the most powerful thing in the world, right? But it doesn't tell you everything. It's short pellets of powerful godly information, but not spelled out. Mashin gib biur in yanim shebetoras Chasidus Chabad. Not so that which is explained in Torah's Chasidus Chabad. Now, how many bookshelves do you need? The whole room full of bookshelves cannot hold these books. I'm serious. There's like an endless amount of Hasidic literature. I'm just talking about the amount right now, right? Just like you're going to take a book of Mishnayos and put them on your shelf, and then you're going to take a book of Gemara and put it on your shelf. It's just volumes and volumes and volumes and volumes and volumes to explain these little words that are said over here, right? It's a simple matter of visible reality. There's something changed. and even the other students of the Maggid, and their students of students of students, even all the way down here, still, they don't have more Hasidus in this voluminous way, voluminous way. Right now, I'm just talking about size, right? So he says you can see in Torah Hasidus Chabad that it was in an ofen of harchava. There was a massive amount of it, shakla v'taria, back and forth discussions, right, by way in a way of Gemara. Shebamamari Torah Hasidus Shelo. In the Alter Rebbe's Hasidus, by the way, starting from the Sefer Tanya. Why do we get all excited about Tanya? Because that was the first time Hasidus was broken down in a Gemara-like fashion. Now, the truth is, compared to the later works, even of the Alter Rebbe himself, the Tanya was considered pretty pellet-like form, right? But compared to any other Hasidic work that ever came out before, it was considered like a treatise, like of massive proportions. And that's why if you find most other Hasidic groups today, right? Like Rabbi Koenig, Alav Shalom, he used to say, he married a Chabadnik, and he used to tell his Hasidim, right? That if you want to understand Likutei Moharan, if you want to understand any of Breslov Hasidus, you have to learn the Tanya first. Because it's like saying, if you want to understand the Mishnah, you must know the Gemara. No one's telling you not to learn a Mishnah. But if you're going to think you're going to learn the Mishnah and understand what's going on, I'm sorry, like that's what we teach children. Memorize the Mishnah so you have it in your head. It's all truth, emes lamito. But if you understand what's going on in that Mishnah, you can't just learn the Mishnah. You have to learn the Gemara. Then you'll know what the Mishnah says. So he says this is why it's called Chabad. Right? Chabad means Chochma Bina Das. It's a total breakdown into Havana and Hasaga, breaking down the ideas into understanding. Right? As its name, Hasidus Chabad. And that's why they called it that. It's like it stood out as a distinct entity from the whole rest of Hasidus, because now we're going to understand it. And this is basically a throwback to what it says in the Zohar, that in the end of days, Mamish, we will learn the Zohar in an ofen of Yisparna soon. We will actually be fed and nourished from the secrets of Kabbalah, not just like a medicine. And when did that period actually happen? With the Tanya, right? With Chabad Hasidus. It's not just like a popularity contest. Hey, I like these guys' hats. Let's go with them. This is something which is like a general revelation of Torah for all of Am Yisrael. No one can exclude themselves from what took place here. This massive change in the manner of revealing Hasidus. Now we can answer the story, the question of the story. That's why there was suddenly, it wasn't double jeopardy. It wasn't a man being tried for the same crime twice, right? There was a brand new accusation against the Alter Rebbe. What was it?
That it wasn't for medicine, it wasn't for life-saving purposes.
That's right.
Indulging in the...
Which means to say that until the Alter Rebbe, what are we seeing here? Until the Alter Rebbe, Kabbalah, to be learned in an expanded way, was asur. You can only learn Kabbalah if you learned it in a short form way. That was mutter, because we were at a stage where the only heter was to save the life. But if you're going to start learning Kabbalah for the sake of bringing Mashiach, no one ever did it before, and it wasn't allowed. And therefore he started doing it, because he wrote the Tanya before he went into prison, right? And so basically that's why he was in prison for 53 days, corresponding to the 53 chapters of the Tanya that he wrote, right? Which corresponds to the 53 parts of the Torah, whatever. The point is that when they get a whiff of what he was attempting to do, then he was stopped because he was doing something asur. He was mamish breaking the law of the Torah. There is no heter for that until we happen to be in the days of preparing for Mashiach, and no one gave me a memo that that's what we're doing yet. Even after he nullified the accusation against the Maggid, right? Through this mushal of grinding up the stone of the precious gem in the crown of the king. Why? Because what is here? He's going to explain, but it's obvious, right? What was the mushal that he gave? He says you can take the precious gemstone, which is the whole glory of the crown, depends on it, which is Kabbalah, and you can grind it up and mix it with water. And then what does the rest of the story say?
He gets a drop.
If a drop will go into the mouth of the prince, it will save his life. We've been talking this whole time that is the exact definition of the heter for learning Kabbalah, to save your life. You're allowed a drop. His analogy, until now, we didn't really realize how exact his analogy was, right? It's mamish amazing. So in the mashal of the Alter Rebbe regarding saving the life of the king through grinding up the stone, he emphasizes that it's at least one drop can go into the mouth of the king, that this drop is enough to save the life of the king. And the example in the analog is that the revelation of Hasidus, Pnimius Torah, the most precious stone in the crown of God, right? If you're allowed to learn one drop in Nakuda in a Mishnah-like fashion, that's the obvious analogy. Because we've already been establishing in a medicine-like form, Kabbalah in a Mishnah concept, in a short form, will save the life of the Jewish people, as it did. It did in the time of the Arizal, right? And it did in the time of the Baal Shem Tov of the Magid. V'rai l'davar, and what's the proof that it actually saves lives? Gili Chasidus Bofen Shel Nakuda, because when the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid and his students, and look what he says, Talmidehem l'dorosa. So he's basically clearly trying to make the point that don't try to put anybody else in the Alter Rebbe's category. He says the Baal Shem Tov, the Magid, their students, and their students until forever, which means no one else was given permission, basically, to reveal Hasidus in a Gemara-like fashion. Any of the other great Hasidic masters, they all fall into this drop-like form. And by the way, they criticized the Alter Rebbe for revealing the Tanya, because they said, you're not looking like the Baal Shem Tov. Our master didn't do what you're doing. So they actually tried to stop the Alter Rebbe. And they said he's a deviation from the path of the Baal Shem Tov, if you're aware of the politics of the original masters, right? But the reality is he wasn't a chas v'shalom against the Baal Shem Tov. He was carrying the work of the Baal Shem Tov to its next logical conclusion, which is that Hasidus was not just given to the world merely to save our lives, it was given to the world ultimately to bring Mashiach. And even though the other students, they didn't get the memo that they were allowed to teach Hasidus in this way, the Alter Rebbe did, right? Or he wrote the memo, and they threw him in jail for it. Anyway, so we can see with our eyes, however, the utility, the usefulness of the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov, the Magid, and all their students forever. Hoyel Pal, it helped and it affected to bring the prince back to life. In other words, it worked. So you look at these other Hasidic communities, they're going strong, right? In other words, if you ask people today, once upon a time, Hasidim were rebels, right? Who is this like deviant Hasidic group that people started to act in these funny ways and have Hasidic, customs? The regular Jewish world tried to banish them. The Vilna Gaon put the Baal Shem Tov in excommunication. Stop with these newfangled ideas. You're not allowed to do it. But what do we see today? If you think about the most frum guy that you can possibly imagine in your mind, he's a Hasidic Jew, right? So the point is that it worked. Giving a drop of Hasidus into the mouth of the Jewish people, it totally revived us and brought us back to our full strength. But when the Alter Rebbe began to reveal Torah's Hasidus, not in a way of drop-like form, but in a way of expansion through Torah's Hasidus Chabad,
they opened the case again, and
they opened the case against him and they threw him in prison. There was all of a sudden a brand new accusation. Whoa, no one said you're allowed to do that. Gili Hasidus in this way, with Havana and Hasaga and grasp in the way of called Chabad, it seemingly is not necessary to save the life of the king, right? I go into the doctor's office, he says, here, take a couple of these pills, you'll be all right. And while you're at it, here's like a whole Shabbos meal and a Thanksgiving dinner, and I'll give you 10 bottles of wine and like a mamash, the head of an ox, I'm saying? Like, I'm fine, doc. Like, I just need a couple pills, I'll be fine. So where did you get off basically giving him all this extra? It's not necessary for saving the life of the king, and therefore it is usur. That's why the Alter Rebbe himself, even though he was the one who came up with the analogy to save the life of the Magid, he was in doubt, maybe he should stop, because he's not because he's saying Hasidus, because he's saying Hasidus in this way. And therefore his rabbis came and they gave him the news that, you know what? Because of your crazy Mesiras Nefesh, and you sat in this room like of solitary confinement, ready to die, and basically being condemned to death by Jews and non-Jews alike, by Misnagdim and Hasidim alike, right? Everybody was against the Alter Rebbe for this. Therefore, and yet you're going to do it anyway, because you want Mashiach now. You have to understand what the Alter Rebbe was. He was ready to die to bring Mashiach. Moshe Rabbeinu was ready to die to save the Jewish people. He said, take me, if it comes down to that. The Alter Rebbe said more. He said, if you don't bring Mashiach, take me. Right? And he mamish put himself into a situation where he pushed the envelope so much that he was about to die over it. And because of his Mesiras Nefesh, it triggered like Rachamim from above. And his teachers came down to him and says, once you started, you got to go more. On the contrary, when you get out of here, do more. So what is that? It's not just a small word. When they said get out of here, do more, they mean you've been given the go-ahead to write the Tanya. That's just the tip of the iceberg of like thousands and thousands and thousands of infinite pages of Chassidus, which are now permissible to do what? To prepare the hearts of the Jewish people for the Messianic age. We're now allowed to learn Torah's Chassidus in a Gemara-like fashion as much as we possibly can, because we have to fit ourselves into a world where there'll be nothing learned except for Chassidus in every corner of the creation. Right? And he basically opened up this new heter. So you have to understand, before I want to conclude, I'm going to have to, we started late, I'm going to finish it because we can't stop right now. But what I want to say is like this. We're celebrating the day he got out of prison. What is that day called?
Yud Tes Kislev.
The great and awesome Yud Tes Kislev. We call it Chag HaChagim.
It's
the holiday of all holidays.
Rosh Hashanah Chassidus.
The Rosh Hashanah Chassidus. We call it the holiday of all holidays. We say it's greater than Yom Kippur. And they say, you're crazy, right? Do you understand what this day is now? I hope you do. This day is the day that Hashem allowed Mashiach to come. The fact that the Alter Rebbe was allowed to teach Chassidus in a way of Talmud means something big happened over here, my friends, on this day. It means that all of a sudden Hashem said, okay, you can now prepare yourself for the end of days. Until that time, the Gullus was a fact which was al pi Torah. We weren't allowed to get out of Gullus. Because how do you get out of Gullus? You have to learn Chassidus so much that you could basically become the Messianic world where the whole world is learning Chassidus. If you're not even allowed to learn Chassidus like that, then the Gullus is stamped into reality by way of the force of Torah law. With the Alter Rebbe didn't just come out of prison. The Alter Rebbe took out of prison with him and started a new era of human history, right? Which we wouldn't even really have. What would the mitzvahs and everything be if it wasn't all leading towards Mashiach? This is the Chag HaChagim, which when Mashiach comes, we're going to say, how did all this happen? How do we wind up in Mashiach? It all started on the day of Yud Tes Kislev. That's when the heter to bring Mashiach came into the world. Serious stuff. Then Hamaisahu Ha'ikar. You know what? Wow, this is annoying. We have to finish it now. We started late. What can I do? He says like this. The main thing is the deed. And this is a sharp word the Rebbe says at the end of this thing. After, I'll just translate it straight. After the instructions of the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid were given to the Alter Rebbe, and they said, go do more. That not only is enough that you shouldn't stop, but you should say even more Chassidus when you get out. Which is now this becomes an instruction for every single Jew, that you're obligated now to prepare yourself for that time of the days of Mashiach, where the whole world will be occupied in nothing but the knowledge of God alone through the learning of Pnimius Torah in a way of understanding. What the Rebbe is saying is very serious here. Remember I said before, well here, let's finish it and I'll add my notes, right? So he's putting this on every single person now. Now that it's basically permissible to learn Chassidus in a messianic way, because what does that do? It prepares you for Mashiach. Then how are you going to exempt yourself from this? You say, no, I'm not interested in Chabad and Chassidus. Sorry, it's not my style. It's not my way. Excuse me, sinner, right? Who gave you the right to not prepare the world for Mashiach? Yeah, I understand a few generations ago you weren't allowed to. So you were mamash a holy person, keeping the Torah. Now that you're allowed to, you have to. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is saying, the Arizal is saying. He says, mutter u'mitzvah legalos chochma. Why does the Arizal say it's permissible and commanded in one foul swoop? What's the connection? Permissible, fine. All of a sudden commanded? Because once it's permissible, it's obligatory. If you couldn't, you couldn't. Once you can, you have to. And therefore, people say, are you Chabad? It's the most ridiculous and infuriating question in the world. You are Chabad. Chabad is a Torah. It's a massive amount of Torah. It's a Torah of expanding Hasidus into a Talmudic fashion, and it's not the possession of a particular group of Jews, just like the Mishnah or the Gemara is not of a particular group of Jews. It's part of Torah, and not only is it part of Torah, it's the part of Torah which brings Mashiach. And you're going to stand there and say, "I don't learn that part." Shame on you. That's what the Rebbe is saying. Shame on you. Once it became permissible, you have to. It brings Mashiach.
It's for all Jews.
All Jews. Yeah. That's why the Rebbe has a campaign to put a man on every street and teach them Chabad Hasidus. Because it's necessary for bringing Mashiach, to prepare ourselves for bringing Mashiach. What are you going to do? Get a new suit? That's how you're going to prepare? Eat better cholent with a bigger strimal? Now you're ready? No, it's an internal realization of God Almighty oneness in a way of understanding. It's called Chabad Hasidus. It is the way of the future. It's for all Jews. Whew. From here it's understood that even a person, according to his own understanding of Pnimiyas HaTorah, right? Here, a person could say that according to his opinion, learning Pnimiyas HaTorah, and particularly learning Chabad, I have to learn Pnimiyas HaTorah in such an expounded way, it's not necessary for me, a guy will say. I'm fine, I'm good to go, my life is spared. Because according to his opinion of himself, his spiritual life is not in any danger. And therefore, he could just learn Nigla, right? When are you allowed to learn Hasidus? When your life is in danger. Or if you're trying to bring Mashiach. So here's a guy sitting in Bnei Brak. He's like, no, I'm good, man. My whole family is religious. I am completely settled in my Jewish life. I live in Eretz Yisrael. I don't even need to learn Hasidus at all because my life is not in danger. And you're telling me I have to learn this in order to save my life. And certainly I don't want to learn more, right? Therefore, he could say, I'll just learn Nigla and Musar, right? And maybe I'll learn a little bit of the Baal Shem Tov's Hasidus, and maybe their students, right, in order to overcome the darkness of these dark times. So the Rebbe says, how can he exempt himself from this learning? When it's an open psak din in the Torah, halacha l'maisa b'nigla the Torah. This is not a law of Hasidus, this is a law in the laws of Talmud Torah in Nigla, right? That every single soul of the Jewish people is obligated to learn the whole Torah. Whether it comes to the pshat of the halachas, or the remez, or the drush, or the sod. In other words, you're not allowed to say, I'm going to learn the whole Shulchan Aruch, but I'm not going to learn Gemara. Right? No, you're doing an avera. In other words, if you didn't get to the Gemara, one thing. But if you decide, I'm not learning Gemara, you're not fulfilling the law of Talmud Torah. And it doesn't just stop at Gemara. It says also the secrets of the Torah. You must learn them, just like you have to learn the simple pshat. Only what? For a very long time, you weren't allowed to learn them. Once you're allowed, mutter mitzvah. And therefore the Rebbe says, how can you exempt himself? You're going against the Torah itself. Right? And not only are you supposed to learn, you're supposed to be machadesh. Every Jew is supposed to bring out new ideas in Torah, whether it's halacha, agada, or the secrets of the Torah. And this is what the Rebbe is saying. He's basically putting this on Mamash, all the guys sitting in Bnei Brak. Get up and buy yourself a library of Chabad Hasidus, guys. I'm not trying to give you good advice. I'm telling you, if you don't, your Mamash is making a big, big problem for yourself in the world. And he says this is the inyan of Yafutzu Ma'aseh Chutza, spreading the well springs everywhere. Publicizing and spreading the well springs of Hasidus in every single place to the point that it reaches the most outside place. And unfortunately, the most outside place could be Bnei Brak, right? It could be a place where Mamish people think that they've got the whole Torah and they don't need this silly Hasidus. This I'm good. I'm Mamish on a higher level. There's a lot of people like that, by the way, right? And then he's explaining to them right now. No. You're chutzah. We have to spread Hasidus to the most distant places, not some guy sitting on the street corner in Miami, to the guy who refuses to learn Hasidus in Bnei Brak. And this will reach us to the promise of Mashiach, to the Baal Shem Tov, that he said, when are you coming? He said, when your teachings will spread out, then it will fulfill the ultimate promise, that the world will be filled with God like water fills the sea. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Heavy duty, huh? Tell the missus.